They thought he was just a humble bookstore owner until the moment he stepped between a powerful CEO and a corporate assassin's bullet and dismantled a billion-dollar conspiracy with nothing but a photographer's eye and unshakable calm. The next morning, 150 private jets lined the tarmac outside his quiet mountain town. And what happened next sent shockwaves through the entire business world. This is not just a story about survival. It's about redemption, trust, and the extraordinary power hidden in ordinary people who refuse to look away when others need help. What started as a chance encounter in a small bookshop on a stormy evening would become a movement that changed how the world saw both wealth and worth. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with money or weapons, it's the one who knows how to see what everyone else has missed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the streets of Ashford Heights into rivers of reflected neon and headlight trails. The kind of rain that made people duck into doorways and forget their manners, shaking water from expensive coats without caring who they splashed inside Turner and Page books. The atmosphere was different. Warm, golden light spilled from vintage lamps positioned carefully between shelves that stretched from floor to ceiling, each one packed with stories that smelled of vanilla, dust, and possibility. The space wasn't large, maybe 1,500 square feet, tucked between a closed bakery and a law office that kept bankers' hours. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in soul. Grant Porter moved through the narrow aisles with the precision of someone who knew every spine, every title, every forgotten corner of his small kingdom. He wore dark jeans, a gray Henley with sleeves pushed to his elbows, and reading glasses that sat low on his nose. At 38, his hair was already showing silver at the temples, and his hands carried the faint stains of ink from an afternoon spent repairing the binding on a 1960s poetry collection. He didn't look like someone with secrets. Just a single dad who ran a bookshop, raised a 10-year-old daughter, and kept to himself in a world that rarely noticed people like him. But his eyes told a different story if you knew how to look. They moved constantly, cataloging, assessing, noticing the smallest shifts in light and shadow. The bell above the door chimed, sharp and insistent. Grant glanced up from the register where he'd been tallying the day's modest earnings. A woman stepped inside, soaked to the bone despite the designer trench coat that clung to her frame. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, expensive leather now ruined by rainwater. Dark auburn hair stuck to her cheeks, and her hands trembled slightly as she pushed the door closed behind her. Grant noticed everything in the span of 2 seconds. The way she checked over her shoulder before fully entering. The absence of an umbrella despite the forecast. The Patek Philippe watch on her wrist, worth more than his entire year's rent. The barely concealed panic in her green eyes. She wasn't here for books. "We close in 10 minutes, Grant said evenly. His voice calm, not unkind. The woman turned to face him fully, and something flickered across her expression. Relief, maybe. Or calculation. "I'll be quick," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Grant nodded once and returned his attention to the register, though his awareness never left her. She moved toward the back of the store, past the fiction section, past the poetry corner where soft jazz played from a small speaker. She stopped near the travel section and pulled a book at random. But Grant saw the way her fingers gripped the spine too tightly, the way her eyes kept darting toward the window. 3 minutes passed. Then the bell chimed again. 2 men entered. Both wore dark jackets. Both moved with the kind of coordinated efficiency that screamed professional. One was tall and broad-shouldered with a shaved head. The other was leaner, sharper, with a scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. Neither looked at Grant. Their eyes swept the store, locked onto the woman, and held. "Evening," the tall one said, his voice flat. Grant straightened slightly, setting down his pen. Gentlemen. The scarred man stepped forward, his gaze still fixed on the woman who had frozen near the back shelves. We're looking for someone. Maybe you've seen her. Auburn hair, designer coat, probably came in within the last few minutes. Grant tilted his head slightly, his expression neutral. Lots of people come through here. The tall man's jaw tightened. Don't play games. We know she's here. The woman stepped out from behind the shelf, her posture shifting from hunted to composed in an instant. I'm here, she said, her voice cold. What do you want? The scarred man smiled, though it never reached his eyes. Miss Callan Verith. We've been trying to reach you all evening. Your board is very concerned. I'm sure they are, Callan replied, her tone sharp as glass. Grant watched the exchange with the stillness of someone trained not to react. He noticed the bulge under the tall man's jacket. Left side, shoulder holster. The scarred man's right hand hovered near his waistband. Also armed. Ms. Verith, the tall man continued, stepping deeper into the store. You need to come with us. There are some documents that require your immediate attention. I'm not going anywhere, Callan said. The tension in the room coiled tighter. The scarred man's hand moved an inch closer to his waistband. Grant saw it. Saw the shift in his weight. Saw the decision forming behind his eyes. And then Grant moved. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. He simply stepped around the counter and positioned himself between Callan and the two men, his hands loose at his sides. His expression calm. The lady said she's not interested, Grant said quietly. The tall man blinked, surprised. This doesn't concern you. It does now, Grant replied. You're in my store. The scarred man laughed, short and ugly. You really want to get involved in this, old man? Grant didn't flinch. I'm 38. And yes, for a moment, no one moved. The rain continued to drum against the windows. The jazz played on, soft and oblivious. Then the scarred man's hand moved toward his waistband. Grant's voice cut through the silence, sharp and precise. You pull that weapon, and I'll have documented evidence of assault with a deadly weapon in a public space. Notice the cameras. He gestured subtly toward two small lenses positioned him near the ceiling, one aimed at the door, one covering the main floor. High resolution. Audio included. Already uploading to a secure cloud server. The scarred man hesitated. Grant continued, his tone unchanged. You're also standing under a motion-activated sprinkler system that's linked to a very sensitive smoke detector. One spark, one sudden movement that triggers the sensor, and everything in here gets soaked, including whatever paperwork you're pretending this is about. The tall man's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing, am I? Grant reached into his pocket slowly, pulled out his phone, and tapped the screen twice. A soft beep echoed from the ceiling. That's the manual override. Want to test it? The two men exchanged glances. The scarred man's hand moved away from his waistband. Smart choice, Grant said. Now, I'm going to ask you both to leave. Calmly. Quietly. And if I see either of you within 100 feet of this place again, I'll make sure every frame of tonight's footage ends up in the hands of someone who'll actually care. The tall man's face darkened, but he stepped back. This isn't over. It is for tonight, Grant replied. The two men turned and walked toward the door. The scarred one paused at the threshold, looked back at Callan, and said, You're making a mistake. Then they were gone. Swallowed by the rain and the night, the silence that followed felt heavier than the storm outside. Grant walked to the door, locked it, and flipped the sign to closed. Then he turned back to Callan, who stood frozen in the same spot, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. You should sit down, Grant said gently. She blinked, as if waking from a trance, then nodded. He guided her to a worn leather chair near the poetry section, and disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he carried 2 mugs of tea, steam curling from their rims. Callan took one, wrapping both hands around it like a lifeline. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. Grant sat across from her in an equally battered chair. "I know." She looked at him, really looked at him, as if trying to decode a puzzle. "Who are you?" "Grant Porter," he said simply. "I own this place." "That's not what I mean," Callan said. "Those cameras, the sprinkler system, the way you read them. That's not just a bookstore owner." Grant took a sip of his tea. "I used to be a crime scene photographer. 15 years with the city's forensic division. I learned to notice things. Details most people miss." Callan's eyes widened slightly. "And you left?" "I had a daughter," Grant said, his voice soft. "The job took me to places I couldn't come back from cleanly. So I chose her instead." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callan set down her mug and exhaled slowly. "My name is Callan Virith. I run Virith Global Solutions. Or I did, until about 6 hours ago when I discovered my entire executive board has been embezzling funds and framing me for it." Grant didn't react with shock or disbelief. He just nodded. "And those two?" He just nodded. "And those two?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Private security. Allegedly hired to protect me. But I think they're here to make sure I disappear before I can expose what's really happening. Grant leaned back in his chair, his mind already working through possibilities, angles, evidence chains. "You have proof?" "Some," Callan said. "Enough to know I'm right. Not enough to prove it in court yet." He studied her for a moment, then stood and walked to the window, peering through the rain-streaked glass. The street was empty. No cars, no shadows. But that didn't mean they were safe. "You can't go back to wherever you came from," Grant said. "I know." He turned back to her. "And you don't have anywhere else to go." Callan's silence was answer enough. Grant exhaled slowly, then made a decision that would change everything. "There's a small apartment above the shop. It's not much, but it's secure. You can stay there tonight." Callan stared at him. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me." Grant met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "Because you walked into my store scared and alone, and 2 armed men followed you. That's all I need to know." She searched his face for ulterior motives, hidden agendas, anything that might explain this stranger's kindness. She found nothing but quiet resolve. "Thank you," she whispered. Grant nodded once, then gestured toward the back staircase. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm and dry. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As they climbed the narrow stairs, the rain continued to fall, washing the streets clean while inside a small bookshop. 2 strangers began an unlikely alliance that would soon shake the foundations of power itself. The apartment above Turner and Page Books was exactly what Grant had promised. Small, secure, and surprisingly comfortable. A single room with a kitchenette tucked into one corner, a worn sofa that converted into a bed, and shelves crammed with more books than any one person could read in a lifetime. The windows were covered with heavy curtains, and a single lamp cast warm light across the space. Callan stood near the kitchenette, still wrapped in her damp coat, watching as Grant moved through the space with quiet efficiency. He pulled out a clean towel, a spare blanket, and a box of chamomile tea that looked like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. "Bathrooms through there," he said, nodding toward a narrow door. "There's hot water and clean towels. Take your time." She nodded but didn't move immediately. Instead, she studied him, this man who had appeared out of nowhere and inserted himself between her and danger without hesitation. "Can I ask you something?" Grant paused, folding the blanket over the back of the sofa. "Sure," Those cameras you mentioned, are they real? A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The one by the door is. The one over the main floor is a dummy. But they didn't know that. Callan blinked, then laughed, a short, incredulous sound. You bluffed. I assessed, Grant corrected. They were hired muscle, not strategists. People like that respond to confidence and the appearance of consequences. I gave them both. She shook her head slowly. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? I don't know, she admitted. But not this. Not someone who reads people like you read books. Grant shrugged. It's the same skill. Every face tells a story. You just have to know which details matter. Callan wanted to ask more, but exhaustion was settling into her bones like lead. She nodded toward the bathroom. I'll just be a few minutes. When she emerged 20 minutes later, her hair was towel-dried. Her face scrubbed clean of the fear and adrenaline that had carved lines around her eyes. She wore one of Grant's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, and a pair of sweatpants that were several sizes too large. She looked younger somehow, less like a billionaire CEO, and more like a person who'd been running for too long. Grant had made more tea and was sitting at a small table near the window, a notebook open in front of him. He glanced up when she entered, then gestured to the chair across from him. Feeling better? A little, Callan said, sitting down. She wrapped her hands around the fresh mug he slid toward her. Thank you for all of this. You don't have to keep thanking me. I do, though, she said quietly, because most people wouldn't have done what you did tonight. Most people would have stayed behind the counter and pretended not to notice. Grant sipped his tea. I'm not most people, clearly. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the rain still drumming against the windows, the world outside dark and indifferent. Then Grant tapped his notebook with one finger. Tell me what happened. From the beginning. Callan exhaled slowly, gathering her thoughts. Virith Global Solutions is a tech conglomerate. We develop AI-driven logistics software for supply chain management. Contracts with everyone from Fortune 500 companies to government agencies. We're worth about $12 billion. Grant nodded, listening without interrupting. 6 months ago, I started noticing irregularities in our quarterly reports. Small discrepancies at first. A few $100,000 here and there. I flagged them, but my CFO assured me it was just accounting adjustments, normal fluctuations. But it wasn't, Grant said. No, Callan replied. It wasn't. I hired an independent auditor 3 months ago. Quietly, paid for it out of my own pocket. And what she found? She trailed off, her hands tightening around the mug. What did she find? A shell company network. 12 different entities, all linked back to members of my executive board. They've been siphoning funds from government contracts for over 2 years. Nearly $400 million. Grant let out a low whistle. That's not embezzlement. That's organized fraud. Worse, Callan said. Some of those contracts were defense-related. If the wrong people find out, it's not just a financial scandal. It's a national security breach. Grant leaned back in his chair, his mind already sorting through implications, connections, and risks. And when you confronted them? I didn't, Callan said. Not directly. I scheduled an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. But someone found out. This afternoon, my personal accounts were frozen. My security detail was replaced with those 2 men you met downstairs. And I received a very polite email suggesting I take a leave of absence for my health. They're trying to isolate you, Grant said. They already have. My lawyer won't return my calls. My assistant quit this morning. Even my driver refused to take me anywhere except back to my penthouse. So you ran. Callan nodded. I got out of the car at a red light and just started walking. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't go back. Grant studied her for a long moment. And the evidence? The audit report? Callan reached into the pocket of her discarded coat and pulled out a small USB drive. She set it on the table between them. Everything's on here. Bank records, email chains, transaction logs. Enough to bury every single one of them. Grant picked up the drive, turning it over in his fingers. This is what they're really after. Yes. He set it back down carefully. Then we need to make copies. Multiple copies. And we need to get this information to someone who can actually do something with it. Callan's eyes widened slightly. Grant met her gaze. You walked into my store. That makes you my responsibility now. I'm not your responsibility, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Maybe not, Grant replied. But you're here, and you need help. So we'll figure this out, together. For the first time since she'd fled her office that afternoon, Callan felt something other than fear. It wasn't quite hope, not yet. But it was close. Why are you doing this? She asked quietly. Grant considered the question. Because I spent 15 years photographing crime scenes. I documented violence, corruption, and cruelty in every form you can imagine. And you know what the worst part was? Not the bodies or the blood. It was the realization that most of it could have been prevented if just one person had been willing to stand up and say something. He paused, looking out the rain-streaked window. I can't change what I saw, but I can choose not to be the person who looks away when someone needs help. Callan felt her throat tighten. Your daughter is lucky to have you. Grant smiled faintly. Her name is Sophie. She's 10. Loves mystery novels, hates math homework, and thinks I'm the most embarrassing person on the planet. Where is she tonight? Sleepover at her best friend's house. She'll be back tomorrow afternoon. Callan nodded, then hesitated. Grant, if this goes badly, if they come back, you could lose everything. Your store. Your home. Maybe even custody of Sophie. I know. And you're still willing to help me? Grant stood and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to scan the street below. Empty, dark. But he knew that wouldn't last. When Sophie was 6, she asked me what I did before I owned the bookstore. I told her I helped people by making sure the truth didn't get lost. She asked if I still did that. I said yes, just in different ways. He let the curtain fall back into place and turned to face Callan. She's watching me, learning what it means to be a good person from how I live, not what I say. So no, I'm not willing to teach her that we only help people when it's convenient. Callan's eyes glistened, but she blinked the moisture away. Okay, then what's the plan? Okay, then what's the plan? Grant returned to the table and flipped to a clean page in his notebook. First, we make copies of that drive. I have a secure cloud backup system and a physical safe deposit box at a bank 2 towns over. We'll split the evidence. Second, we reach out to someone who can verify the information and take it public if necessary. Do you know any journalists you trust? Callan thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. There's one, Ivy Newman, investigative reporter for the National Business Journal. She's tough, fair, and hates corporate fraud. Good, we'll contact her tomorrow. But not from here, and not using any device that can be traced. And third, Grant's expression hardened slightly. We prepare for them to come back, because they will. And next time, they won't be polite. Callan swallowed hard. You really think they'll escalate? $400 million is a lot of motivation, Grant said. And desperate people do desperate things. She nodded, her jaw set. Then we'd better be ready. Grant smiled, a small, genuine expression. We will be. They spent the next hour working through details, contingencies, and backup plans. Grant sketched out a rough timeline while Callan wrote down names, dates, and connections. By the time they finished, the rain had slowed to a gentle patter, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to gray the eastern sky. Callan yawned, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Grant stood and pulled the sofa out into a bed, laying the blanket and pillow he'd prepared earlier. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." She nodded and sank onto the makeshift bed, her eyes already heavy. "Grant?" He paused at the door. "Yeah? Thank you. Not just for tonight, for believing me." He gave her a small nod. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Door's locked, and I'm a light sleeper." As he descended the stairs back to the bookstore, Grant's mind was already racing ahead, mapping out moves and countermoves like pieces on a chessboard. He didn't know yet just how dangerous this game would become. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let Callan Virith face it alone in the quiet hours before sunrise. While the city slept and the rain washed the streets clean, a bookstore owner and a billionaire CEO began planning. A war neither of them had asked for, but both were determined to win. Morning arrived with deceptive calm. Sunlight filtered through the bookstore windows, catching dust motes in golden streams and illuminating the spines of 1,000 stories. Grant had been awake since 5, moving through his usual routine with mechanical precision, brewing coffee, checking the perimeter, ensuring every lock and camera was functioning properly. Upstairs, Callan stirred, disoriented for a moment by the unfamiliar surroundings, before memory crashed back like a wave. She sat up slowly, running her hands through her tangled hair, and noticed a fresh set of clothes folded neatly on the chair beside the bed. Jeans, a simple gray sweater, and a note written in precise handwriting. "These belong to my late wife. Should fit. Come down when you're ready." 20 minutes later, she descended the narrow staircase to find Grant behind the counter, typing rapidly on a laptop that looked simultaneously ancient and impeccably maintained. He glanced up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "Coffee's fresh," he said, nodding toward a thermos on the counter. "There's also toast and jam in the back if you're hungry." "Thank you," Callan said, pouring herself a cup. The clothes fit surprisingly well, and for the first time in days, she felt almost normal. "What are you working on?" Grant turned the laptop toward her. On the screen was a detailed grid, each cell containing timestamps, file names, and coded annotations. "I've been cataloging the contents of your USB drive. Cross-referencing transaction. Dates with your board members' known schedules and public appearances." Callan leaned closer, her eyes widening as she scanned the data. "This is incredible. How long have you been working on this?" "Since 3 this morning," Grant said matter-of-factly. "I don't sleep much." She scrolled through the spreadsheet, noticing connections and patterns she hadn't seen before. "You've linked the shell company transactions to specific board meetings. And here, you've identified gaps in the accounting that correspond with international travel records." "Not just travel," Grant said, pulling up another window. "I cross-checked. Their passport stamps with the date's funds were transferred to offshore accounts. Your CFO, Brody Nash, was in the Cayman Islands 4 times in the last year. Each visit coincided with a major withdrawal." Callan sank into the chair beside him, stunned. "How did you do this so fast?" Grant shrugged. "Pattern recognition. It's the same skill I used at crime scenes. Every crime leaves a signature, a rhythm. Financial fraud is no different. People think numbers are clean, objective, but they're not. They tell stories if you know how to read them." He pulled up a photograph on the screen, a still image from what appeared to be security footage. "This is from a restaurant in Nassau, taken 6 months ago." "Notice anything?" Callan studied the image. 3 men sat at an outdoor table, their faces partially obscured by shadows. "I can't see who they are." Grant clicked a key, and the image enhanced, sharpening the details. "That's because the original resolution was deliberately degraded. But if you adjust for ambient light ratios and factor in the reflective surfaces around them, you can extrapolate missing data." The image sharpened further, and Callan gasped. That's Brody and Hayden Burke, my chief operating officer. But who's the third man? That, Grant said, is where things get interesting. He pulled up another window, this one showing a corporate profile. The man in the photo was identified as Jason Curtis, CEO of Meridian Security Solutions, a private military contractor with known ties to several governments. Why would my executives be meeting with a defense contractor? Callan asked, though a sick feeling was already forming in her stomach. Because Meridian Security Solutions doesn't just provide security, Grant said quietly. They broker deals. They connect people who need things done quietly with people willing to do them. And according to public records, they've been awarded 3 major contracts in the last 18 months, all of which were facilitated through Virith Global's logistics network. Callan's hands trembled slightly as she set down her coffee. They used my company to launder military contracts. Worse, Grant said. They used your company's reputation and clearance to secure contracts they couldn't get on their own. Then they pocketed the difference between what the contracts were worth and what they actually paid to fulfill them. That's treason, Callan whispered. Grant nodded. Which is why they're so desperate to keep you quiet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of what they'd uncovered pressed down like a physical force. Then Callan turned to Grant, her expression shifting from shock to determination. You said you used to photograph crime scenes. But what you just did, this isn't just photography. This is forensic analysis at a level most investigators couldn't achieve with a full team and unlimited resources. Grant closed the laptop carefully. I had a good teacher. Who? He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Her name was Dr. Helena Cross. She ran the forensic imaging department at the city's main precinct. Brilliant woman. She taught me that crime scene photography wasn't just about documenting what happened. It was about revealing what people tried to hide. What happened to her? Grant's expression darkened. She was investigating corruption within the department. Found evidence that several high-ranking officers were taking bribes from organized crime. She was going to go public. He paused. Her car went off a bridge 3 days before the press conference. They ruled it an accident. Callan's breath caught. But you don't think it was? I know it wasn't, Grant said quietly. I was supposed to be in that car with her. I stayed late to finish processing a batch of photos. That decision saved my life. And you left the force after that. I couldn't stay, Grant said, not knowing what I knew. Not when the system I'd trusted to pursue justice had been compromised from the inside. So I took everything Helena taught me, everything I'd learned about reading evidence and seeing truth, and I walked away. He looked around the bookstore, his expression softening. I bought this place with my savings. Created a life where I could control the variables, where I could protect the people I loved without wondering if the person standing next to me was the one who'd pull the trigger. Callan reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm sorry for what you lost, for what they took from you. Grant met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw past the calm exterior to the grief and anger that still lived beneath. Helena used to say that the truth doesn't care about convenience or comfort. It just is, and if we're not willing to stand up for it, even when it costs us everything, then we deserve the darkness that follows. She sounds like she was an incredible person. She was, Grant said. And she'd tell me I'm an idiot for getting involved in this. Callan smiled faintly. But you're doing it anyway. Yeah, I am. The bell above the door chimed, and both of them tensed. Grant stood smoothly, positioning himself between Callan and the entrance, his body language shifting into something alert and ready. A young woman stepped inside, shaking rain from a bright yellow umbrella. She wore a postal service uniform and carried a small package. Morning. Delivery for Grant Porter? Grant relaxed slightly, but didn't lower his guard. That's me. The woman handed over the package, had him sign a digital pad, and left with a cheerful wave. Grant locked the door behind her and examined the package carefully. No return address. Plain brown paper. His name and the bookstore address written in block letters. "What is it?" Callan asked, moving closer. "I don't know," Grant said. "I'm not expecting anything." He carried the package to the counter and grabbed a letter opener, slicing through the tape with surgical precision. Inside was a burner phone and a single-typed note. Grant read it aloud. "You have something that belongs to us. Return it by noon tomorrow, and no one gets hurt. Refuse, and we'll make sure you lose everything that matters. Check the phone." Callan's face paled. "They know I'm here." Grant powered on the burner phone. A single video file was loaded on the device. He pressed play, and his blood ran cold. The video showed Sophie, his daughter, playing in the yard of her friend's house. The timestamp indicated it had been filmed that morning, less than 2 hours ago. The camera zoomed in slowly on her face, capturing her laughter as she kicked a soccer ball. Then the video cut to black, and a distorted voice spoke, "Noon tomorrow. The drive. Or she disappears." Grant's hand tightened around the phone, his knuckles white. For the first time since Callan had met him, she saw raw emotion crack through his composure. Not fear, fury. "They threatened Sophie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Callan felt her stomach drop. "Grant, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. I shouldn't have stayed here. I shouldn't have—" "Stop," Grant said, cutting her off. His eyes were hard now, focused. "This isn't your fault. This is theirs. And they just made the worst mistake of their lives." He set the phone down and pulled out his laptop again, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "They think threatening my daughter will make me fold. What they don't realize is that they just gave me every reason to destroy them." Callan watched as Grant pulled up a new set of files, these ones marked with dates and locations from years ago. "What are you doing?" "Calling in favors," Grant said. "I may have left the force, but I didn't cut all my ties. There are people who owe me, people who understand what it means to protect family." He opened an encrypted messaging app and typed rapidly. Within seconds, responses began flooding in. 3 retired detectives, a forensic accountant, a federal prosecutor who'd worked with Grant on a major trafficking case years ago. "They have numbers," Grant said, his voice cold and precise. "We have truth, evidence, and people who actually give a damn about justice. They want a war? We'll give them one they'll never forget." Callan felt something shift in the air between them. This wasn't just about her anymore. It wasn't even just about the money or the corruption. This was about a father protecting his daughter, and heaven help anyone who stood in his way. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Grant looked at her, and she saw the full weight of his expertise, his experience, and his determination focused like a laser. "We're going to set a trap. And when they walk into it, we're going to make sure the whole world is watching." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting sharp shadows across the street. Inside Turner and Page Books, 2 people who'd met by chance just hours ago began preparing for a confrontation that would change everything. And somewhere across the city, men who thought they held all the power had no idea they'd just awakened something far more dangerous than they could imagine. A father with nothing left to lose and every skill needed to win. The afternoon sun slanted through the bookstore windows, casting long rectangles of light across the worn floorboards. Grant had converted the back storage room into a makeshift operations center, pushing aside boxes of inventory to make space for his laptop, Callan's files, and a whiteboard he'd salvaged from the alley behind the store. Callan stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, mapping out the connections between her board members, while Grant cross-referenced dates on his computer. They'd been working in focused silence for nearly 2 hours. The only sounds the scratch of marker on board and the soft clicking of keys. "Hayden Burke," Callan said. Circling a name, has been with Virith for 8 years. Started as director of operations, promoted to coup 3 years ago. He's methodical, cautious, never takes risks. Except he did, Grant said, pulling up a bank statement. 6 transfers to a Cayman Islands account over 18 months. Each one exactly 48 hours after a major contract was finalized. Callan shook her head, still struggling to reconcile the man she'd trusted with the criminal the evidence revealed. I promoted him. I stood at his wedding. I thought I knew him. Grant looked up from the screen, his expression gentle. The best lies are the ones that look like truth. He counted on your trust. That's what made him effective. She set down the marker and sank into a folding chair, suddenly exhausted. How do you do it? How do you look at evidence like this every day and not lose faith in people? Grant leaned back, considering the question. I don't look at people through evidence. I look at evidence to find people. There's a difference. I don't understand. He stood and walked to the small window that overlooked the alley. When I worked crime scenes, I saw the worst of humanity. Violence, greed, cruelty in forms most people can't imagine. It would have been easy to decide that everyone was capable of that darkness, that trust was just naivety waiting to be exploited. But you didn't. No, Grant said quietly. Because for every crime scene I photographed, I also documented the people who called it in. The neighbors who heard something wrong and chose to act. The witnesses who came forward despite the risk. The families who demanded justice even when the system failed them. He turned back to face her. Darkness exists, but so does light. And I decided a long time ago which one I wanted to amplify. Callan felt something crack open inside her chest. A tightness she'd been carrying for so long she'd forgotten it was there. I've spent the last 6 months feeling like an idiot for not seeing this sooner. For trusting the wrong people. For building something that could be used to hurt others. You're not an idiot, Grant said firmly. You're someone who chose to see the best in people until they proved otherwise. That's not weakness. That's courage. It doesn't feel like courage, Callan admitted. It feels like failure. Grant pulled up a second chair and sat across from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. Can I tell you something about Sophie? Callan nodded. When she was 6, she came home from school crying. Another kid had stolen her lunch and lied about it to the teacher. Sophie was devastated, not because she was hungry, but because she'd shared her snacks with this kid the day before. She felt betrayed. What did you tell her? I told her that kindness doesn't come with a guarantee. Sometimes you extend trust and it gets broken. But that doesn't mean you stop being kind. It means you get smarter about who deserves it. He paused, his voice softening. Then I taught her how to read people. How to notice the small tells that reveal character. Not so she'd become cynical, but so she'd be protected while staying open. Callan's eyes glistened. That's beautiful. She still shares her lunch, Grant said with a small smile. But now she knows which kids will actually appreciate it. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of shared understanding settling between them. Then Callan spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I haven't had a real conversation like this in years. Everyone in my world wants something. Partnerships, investments, access, favors. I stopped knowing how to just talk to people without calculating what it would cost me. Grant nodded slowly. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about being surrounded by people who only see what you can do for them, not who you actually are. Yes, Callan breathed. Exactly that. She looked at him, really looked at him. Seeing not just the bookstore owner who'd saved her, but the man who'd chosen a different path because he valued something more than success or recognition. Why did you really leave forensics? It wasn't just about Helena, was it? Grant was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain, carefully stored, but never forgotten. Sophie's mother, Claire, she died when Sophie was 3. Ovarian cancer, stage 4. We had 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I'm so sorry, Callan said softly. I was working a case when she got the diagnosis, Grant continued. Multiple homicide, high profile. The department needed someone who could document the scene with precision, and I was the best they had. So I stayed late, worked overtime, told myself I was doing it for our family, for the insurance, for the future. He paused, his jaw tight. Claire never complained. She went to appointments alone, managed her pain alone, planned for a future she knew she wouldn't see. And I kept taking photos of death while missing the life slipping away from the person I loved most. Callan reached across the space between them and took his hand. He didn't pull away. He didn't pull away. The night before she died, Grant said, his voice rough, she asked me to promise her something. She said, "Don't let this job take you from Sophie the way it took you from me. She needs a father who's present, not a ghost who shows up between crime scenes." A tear slid down his cheek and he wiped it away impatiently. So I left. I sold everything we had, bought this bookstore, and built a life where I could keep that promise. Where Sophie would never wonder if I'd choose work over her. Callan's throat tightened. She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have her, Grant corrected. She's the reason I still believe people are worth fighting for. Every time I think the world is too broken, too corrupt, I look at her and remember that she's watching, learning, becoming who she'll be based on what I show her is possible. That's why you helped me, Callan said, understanding flooding through her. Not just because it was right, but because Sophie's watching. Partly, Grant admitted. But also because when you walked through that door, scared and alone, I saw someone who'd spent their whole life building something meaningful, only to watch it get twisted into something ugly. And I thought about Helena, about how she died trying to expose corruption, and I realized I had a choice. What choice? To be the person who looks away, or to be the person who stands up. Even when it's hard. Even when it's dangerous. He met her eyes. Especially then. Callan felt tears spill over, weeks of fear and isolation and betrayal finally breaking through the walls she'd built. Grant didn't try to stop her or offer empty comfort. He simply sat with her, his hand steady in hers, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm. When she finally spoke again, her voice was raw but clear. I've built a billion-dollar company. I've negotiated with world leaders. I've been on the cover of Forbes 3 times. And somehow, sitting in this storage room with you, I feel more like myself than I have in a decade. Grant smiled gently. Maybe because I don't care about any of that. I care that you refuse to let your company be used for something wrong, even when it cost you everything. That's the person I'm helping. Not the CEO, the person. I don't know how to be just a person anymore, Callan admitted. You already are, Grant said. You're just remembering. They stayed like that as the afternoon light shifted to gold. 2 people who'd been carrying impossible weights alone, finding unexpected relief in shared burden. And for the first time since her world had collapsed, Callan felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope, not the hollow corporate optimism she'd performed for investors and boards, but real hope, grounded in the simple truth that she wasn't facing this nightmare alone anymore. That someone saw her, believed her, and was willing to stand beside her, not for profit or prestige, but because it was right. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. Inside Turner and Page Books, 2 strangers were becoming something else entirely. Not quite friends yet, but something deeper. Allies. Partners. 2 people who'd been broken by the world's cruelty, learning to trust again. The morning arrived with an unwelcome surprise. Grant found it when he opened the bookstore at 6. A plain manila envelope wedged into the mail slot, no postage, no return address. Just his name typed in stark black letters. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Sophie at school, walking through the playground. Sophie at her friend's house, visible through a window. Sophie at the grocery store with Grant, just 3 days ago, captured from across the parking lot with a telephoto lens, and beneath the photos, a single typed message, "You have until noon. The drive or we escalate." Grant's hands didn't shake as he spread the photographs across the counter. His breathing remained steady, controlled. But Callan, descending the stairs with a fresh cup of coffee, saw his face and knew immediately that something had shifted. "What is it?" she asked, setting down her mug. Grant didn't answer at first. He simply turned the photographs so she could see them. Callan's face went pale. "They're watching her," she whispered. "Grant, we have to go to the police. This is kidnapping, stalking. This is exactly what they want," Grant interrupted, his voice cold and precise. "They want us scared, reactive, making mistakes. The moment we go to the police, they'll have lawyers claiming harassment, that we're unstable, that I'm fabricating evidence to help you avoid prosecution." "But Sophie is safe," Grant said firmly. "I called her friend's parents an hour ago. Told them Sophie needed to stay a few more days, family emergency. They agreed. And I've already contacted someone who's moving them to a secure location." Callan stared at him. "Who?" "A former colleague. Someone I trust with my life, which means I trust them with hers." Before Callan could respond, Grant's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression hardened further. "They're getting bold." He turned the phone toward her. "A text message from an unknown number. Check your email. Time to negotiate." Grant opened his laptop and pulled up his email. The message was brief, professional, and chilling in its casual tone. "Mr. Porter, we appreciate your concern for your daughter's well-being. We have no intention of harming anyone. We simply want what belongs to us. Ms. Virith has in her possession proprietary information that was obtained illegally. Return it, and everyone goes home safely. Refuse, and will be forced to take more direct action. You have until noon to decide." Attached, please find a preview of what direct action looks like. The attachment was a video file. Grant hesitated, then played it. The footage showed the interior of Turner and Page Books, filmed from across the street sometime in the middle of the night. The camera angle captured the front entrance, the windows, even the narrow alley that led to the back door. Then the video cut to a different angle, this one inside Grant's apartment above the store, showing the empty living space from a hidden camera he hadn't detected. The message was clear: "We've been inside. We can reach you whenever we want." Callan felt her knees weaken. "They've been in here. In your home." Grant closed the laptop with controlled precision. "Not anymore, they haven't." He walked to a locked drawer behind the counter, pulled out a small electronic device, and began moving through the store systematically. Every few feet, the device beeped softly. Grant located 3 listening devices, one in the main room, one near the back storage area, one in the stairwell. He collected them without comment and dropped them into a metal box, sealing it shut. "How long have those been there?" Callan asked, her voice shaking. "Based on the dust patterns, 2 days. Maybe 3. They've been listening to everything we've said since you arrived." Callan sank into a chair, the weight of violation pressing down on her. "Then they know everything. Our plans, the evidence, the people you've contacted, everything. They know what we said," Grant corrected. "They don't know what we didn't say." He pulled out a notepad and wrote quickly, "From now on, critical information only on paper. No phones, no computers unless air-gapped. Assume everything electronic is compromised." Callan nodded, taking the pen from him. She wrote, "What about the people you contacted? Are they compromised too?" Grant shook his head and wrote back, "Communications were encrypted and routed through secure channels. They can't trace those connections." They spent the next 20 minutes communicating only through written notes. mapping out a strategy while speaking aloud about mundane bookstore business for the benefit of anyone still monitoring them remotely. Then Grant's phone rang. Unknown number. He put it on speaker. Mr. Porter, a smooth male voice said, "I hope you've had time to consider our proposal." "Who is this?" Grant asked evenly. "My name is Cameron Steele. I represent certain interests that would prefer this situation be resolved quietly and amicably. Ms. Virith has information that doesn't belong to her. We'd like it returned. And if I refuse, then you force us into a position neither of us wants. You're a father, Mr. Porter. You understand the value of protecting what matters most. We're simply asking you to make the rational choice." Grant's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm. "You're asking me to help you cover up fraud, embezzlement, and possibly treason. That's not rational. That's criminal." Cameron chuckled, a cold sound devoid of humor. "Such dramatic language. We prefer to think of it as resolving a misunderstanding. Ms. Virith misinterpreted some financial data. We're willing to help her correct that misunderstanding, provided she stops making baseless accusations." "The data isn't misinterpreted," Callan interjected, stepping closer to the phone. "It's documented proof that you and my board have been stealing from government contracts." "Ms. Virith," Cameron said smoothly, "I'd be very careful about making statements you can't substantiate. Defamation carries serious legal consequences." "So does threatening a 10-year-old, Grant said flatly. There was a pause. Then Cameron's voice returned, colder now. "No one has threatened anyone, Mr. Porter. We've simply made you aware of certain realities. Your daughter is safe. She remains safe as long as you make reasonable decisions." "Noon," Grant said. "You want an answer by noon, correct? Then you'll have one." Grant ended the call and immediately removed the battery from his phone. He wrote on the notepad, "They're tracking call locations." "We need to move," Callan wrote back. "Move where?" "They know everywhere we go." Grant smiled grimly and wrote, "Not everywhere." He led her to the back storage room and moved a stack of boxes aside, revealing a small door she hadn't noticed before. It was old, painted the same color as the wall, nearly invisible unless you knew to look for it. "What is that?" Callan whispered. Forgetting to write. Grant put a finger to his lips and opened the door. Behind it was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. He gestured for her to follow, grabbing a flashlight from a shelf. They descended carefully, the stairs creaking under their weight. At the bottom was a tunnel, low-ceilinged and brick-lined, clearly old, possibly dating back a century or more. "Where does this go?" Callan asked once they were far enough from the bookstore that sound wouldn't carry. "Old service tunnel," Grant explained, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. "This whole block was built in the 1920s during Prohibition. The tunnel connected several businesses to a warehouse 2 streets over. Most people don't even know it exists anymore." They walked in silence for several minutes, the air cool and damp, until they reached a metal door. Grant produced a key, unlocked it, and they emerged into a basement storage area filled with commercial kitchen equipment. "Where are we?" Callan asked, looking around. "Back entrance to the Copper Kettle, a restaurant that's been closed for renovations for 6 months. The owner's an old friend. Owes me a favor." Grant led her upstairs through the empty restaurant to a small office. He unlocked a filing cabinet and pulled out a laptop that looked brand new, still in its packaging. "Air-gapped," he explained. "Never been connected to the internet. I keep it for emergencies." He powered it up and inserted Callan's USB drive. "We're going to do something they won't expect." "What?" "We're going to give them exactly what they want." Callan's eyes widened. "What?" "Grant, no, we can't." He held up a hand. "Not the real drive. A modified version. One that looks identical but contains tracking malware embedded in the files. The moment they open it on any network device, It'll ping their location and copy every piece of data on their system. Understanding dawned on Callan's face. We're setting a trap. Exactly. They think we're scared, desperate, ready to fold. We'll let them keep thinking that. And when they take the bait, we'll have everything we need to expose not just your board, but everyone they're connected to. Callan watched as Grant's fingers flew across the keyboard, his expression focused and intense. This was the man behind the mild-mannered bookstore owner, the forensic expert who'd spent years learning how to catch people who thought they were untouchable. How long will this take? She asked. 2 hours to build the modified drive properly. Another hour to set up the monitoring system. He glanced at his watch, which gives us 30 minutes to spare before their deadline. Callan pulled up a chair beside him. Then let's get to work. As they worked in focused silence, building a trap for the people who'd threatened everything they cared about. Neither of them noticed the small security camera hidden in the corner of the office, its red light blinking steadily in the darkness. Someone was still watching, and the game was far from over. The meeting location was a public park, deliberately chosen for its exposure. Grant had insisted on neutral ground with witnesses, cameras, and multiple exit routes. The fountain at Riverside Park fit the criteria perfectly: open, populated, and under constant surveillance. Grant arrived at 11:45, 15 minutes early, carrying a leather messenger bag. He wore dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a light jacket that concealed a digital recorder clipped to his belt. His eyes swept the park methodically, cataloging exits, identifying potential threats. Noting the placement of security cameras mounted on nearby light poles, Callan waited 2 blocks away in the closed restaurant, monitoring a laptop that showed Grant's location via a GPS tracker sewn into his jacket lining. Beside her sat Maxwell Hart, the federal prosecutor Grant had contacted, watching the same screen with professional intensity. "He knows what he's doing," Maxwell said quietly, noticing Callan's white-knuckled grip on the table edge. "Grant's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with. If anyone can pull this off, it's him." "That doesn't make it less terrifying," Callan replied. At precisely noon, 3 black sedans pulled up to the park entrance. 6 men emerged, all wearing dark suits, moving with the coordinated precision of trained security personnel. Cameron Steele was among them, distinguished by his salt and pepper hair and the confident way he surveyed the park. Before approaching, Grant remained seated on a bench near the fountain, the messenger bag resting beside him. He didn't stand as Cameron approached, didn't show any deference or fear. "Mr. Porter," Cameron said smoothly, gesturing to the bench. "May I?" "It's a public park," Grant replied. Cameron sat, maintaining a careful distance. "I appreciate you being reasonable about this situation. It speaks to your intelligence and your priorities." "My priority is my daughter," Grant said flatly. "You made that clear enough. And she's perfectly safe, I assure you. This doesn't need to be complicated. You give us the drive, we verify its contents, and everyone goes home happy." Grant reached into the messenger bag slowly, watching Cameron's security team tense at the movement. He withdrew a small USB drive and held it up. "Everything Callan copied is on here. Financial records, email chains, transaction logs, all of it." Cameron reached for it, but Grant pulled it back slightly. "I want assurances. Written guarantees that neither Callan nor my daughter will be contacted, followed, or threatened again." "Of course," Cameron said, producing a folded document from his jacket. "Standard non-disclosure agreement. Sign this, hand over the drive, and we're done." Grant took the document and read it carefully, his forensic training allowing him to spot the problematic clauses immediately. The NDA wasn't just about silence. It included provisions that would make him legally liable for any future misstatements about Virith Global or its executives, effectively muzzling him permanently under threat of financial ruin. "This isn't what we discussed," Grant said. Cameron's smile didn't reach his eyes. It's standard legal protection. Surely you understand we need safeguards against future complications. What I understand, Grant said, setting the document down, is that this agreement makes me complicit in covering up federal crimes. I won't sign it. The atmosphere shifted. Cameron's pleasant facade cracked slightly. Mr. Porter, I don't think you appreciate the position you're in. You have something we need. We've been patient, but that patience has limits. So does my tolerance for threats, Grant replied. He raised his voice slightly, projecting toward the security cameras. You're asking me to sign a document that prevents me from reporting embezzlement, fraud, and corruption. That's obstruction of justice. Cameron's jaw tightened. He gestured subtly, and two of his security team moved closer, flanking the bench. You're being unnecessarily difficult. Sign the agreement and hand over the drive, or we'll be forced to take more direct action. Direct action, Grant repeated. You mean like the listening devices you planted in my store? Or the cameras you hid in my home? Or the men who've been photographing my daughter? Cameron leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You think you're clever, recording this conversation, creating a public spectacle. It won't matter. We have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers who will bury you in litigation. Connections that reach into every level of law enforcement. You're one man running a failing bookstore. You can't win this fight. Grant met his eyes steadily. You're right about one thing. I'm one man. But I'm not alone. He raised his hand in a subtle signal. Across the park, Maxwell Hart emerged from behind a maintenance building, flanked by two FBI agents. They approached with purposeful strides, badges already visible. Cameron's expression shifted from confidence to calculation an instant. What is this? This, Grant said, standing now, is the direct action you should have worried about. Maxwell stopped a few feet away, his voice carrying authority. Cameron Steele, you're under investigation for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to threaten a federal witness. These agents will need to ask you some questions. Cameron stood slowly, his mind clearly racing through options. I'm invoking my right to counsel. I have nothing to say. That's your prerogative, Maxwell replied. But I should inform you that we've been monitoring this conversation with Mr. Porter's cooperation. We have recordings of you acknowledging surveillance activities, threatening a minor, and attempting to coerce a witness into signing an agreement that constitutes obstruction. Cameron's face darkened. That recording is inadmissible. This is a public park. You had no warrant. We had probable cause based on information provided by Ms. Callan Virith and corroborated by Mr. Porter's forensic analysis. Maxwell interrupted. And as for the recording, Mr. Porter was acting in legitimate self-defense after receiving multiple threats. Single-party consent applies. One of Cameron's security team moved toward the car, but the FBI agents blocked his path. Nobody's leaving yet, one agent said calmly. We need to establish identities and take statements. Grant watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction, but his focus remained sharp. This was only the first move. Cameron was the facilitator, but the real power sat in boardrooms and corner offices, insulated by layers of plausible deniability. Cameron seemed to realize he'd lost this particular battle. His posture shifted, becoming more formal, more careful. I want my attorney present for any questioning. Absolutely, Maxwell said. In the meantime, these agents will transport you downtown. Mr. Porter, thank you for your cooperation. We'll need you to come in later today to provide a formal statement. Grant nodded. As Cameron was led away, he turned to Grant one last time. This isn't over. You've made powerful enemies today. I've made powerful enemies before, Grant replied quietly. They're not as scary as you think. After the vehicles departed, Maxwell approached Grant with an extended hand. That was riskier than I would have liked, but it worked, We have enough to begin formal proceedings against Steele and potentially leverage him against the board members. What about Sophie? Grant asked, the first hint of strain showing in his voice. Is she safe? We have protective surveillance on her location as of 2 hours ago. She doesn't know, but she's being watched by people who actually care about keeping her safe. Grant exhaled slowly, some of the tension finally leaving his shoulders. Thank you, Max. Thank Claire, Maxwell said softly. She made me promise that if you ever needed help, I'd drop everything. I'm just keeping my word. The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared history hanging between them. Then Maxwell's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. What is it? Grant asked. Text from my office. Apparently, someone just leaked the entire Virith Global story to the press. It's hitting news sites right now, complete with documentation, accusations, everything. Grant's eyes widened. We didn't authorize that. Callan wanted to wait until we had more evidence. Maxwell's frown deepened. Then someone else just made a move. The question is who, and what they're trying to accomplish. Both men's phones buzzed simultaneously. Grant looked at his screen and felt his blood run cold. A news alert. Breaking. Billionaire CEO accused of massive fraud. Federal investigation underway. Key witness found dead in apparent suicide. The article included a photo. Grant recognized him immediately. It was Brody Nash, Callan's CFO, one of the board members they'd identified as central to the embezzlement scheme. They're tying up loose ends, Grant said quietly. Nash knew too much. They silenced him and made it look like guilt. Maxwell's expression turned grim, which means everyone else involved is now in damage control mode. They'll be desperate, unpredictable. And desperate people make mistakes, Grant replied. But even as he said it, he felt the shift in the air. The game had just escalated beyond legal maneuvering and threats. Someone had committed murder, and that changed everything. Back at the restaurant, Callan stared at the same news alert, her hands shaking. She'd known Brody for 8 years, had trusted him, promoted him, considered him a friend. And now he was dead, his name being dragged through the media as a criminal and a coward. She looked up as Grant entered, his expression telling her everything she needed to know. They killed him, didn't they? It wasn't suicide. We don't know that yet, Grant said carefully. But my instinct says yes. Callan's voice hardened, grief transforming into steel. Then we don't wait anymore. We don't build cases or gather more evidence. We go public with everything we have right now, and we make sure the entire world knows exactly who's responsible. Grant looked at Maxwell, who nodded slowly. She's right. We're past the point of careful strategy. Now we need overwhelming force, maximum exposure. Then let's give them a war they'll never forget, Callan said, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. They wanted to destroy me? Fine, but I'm taking them all down with me. In that moment, Grant saw not the frightened woman who'd stumbled into his bookstore days ago, but the brilliant, fierce leader who'd built an empire from nothing. She'd been knocked down, but she wasn't broken. And now she was ready to fight back with everything she had. The real battle was just beginning. 3 days after Cameron Steele's arrest, Turner and Page books looked different. The main floor had been transformed into a war room, with whiteboards covering every available wall, laptops arranged on makeshift tables, and stacks of documents organized in precise rows. The smell of coffee was constant, the atmosphere electric with focused energy. Grant stood at one whiteboard, mapping out connections between shell companies while Callan worked at a laptop, cross-referencing names against public records. Maxwell had assigned them a junior FBI analyst named Ivy Newman, who brought technical expertise that complemented Grant's investigative instincts. Found another one, Ivy called out, turning her screen toward them. Hayden Burke made 3 calls to a burner phone the day before Brody Nash died. The phone pinged off towers near Nash's apartment. Grant marked it on the board with red ink. That's not coincidence. Burke knew what was coming. Callan rubbed her tired eyes. They'd been working 16-hour days, sleeping in shifts, existing on takeout and determination. We need to connect Burke directly to Cameron. Right now we have circumstantial evidence, but nothing that proves coordination. What about financial transfers? Grant asked. Has anyone tracked money moving between Burke and Meridian Security? Ivy pulled up another window. Not directly, but there's a consulting firm called Apex Advisory that received payments from both Burke's personal account and Meridian. Could be a cutout. Grant walked to the laptop and studied the data. His forensic training kicked in, seeing patterns others might miss. Look at the dates. Every payment to Apex happens exactly 10 days after a major Virith contract is finalized. That's not random billing, that's systematic payoff timing. Callan leaned in closer. Can we subpoena Apex's records? Already in motion, Ivy said. Maxwell's pushing for an expedited warrant based on the Nash death investigation. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Grant tensed instinctively, but relaxed when he saw Sophie's face pressed against the glass, waving enthusiastically. Behind her stood the protective detail Maxwell had arranged. A kind-faced woman named Linda Walker who'd been keeping Sophie entertained and safe. Grant unlocked the door and Sophie burst in, throwing her arms around him. Dad, I missed you. Linda took me to the Science Museum and we saw the dinosaur exhibit, and there was this huge T-Rex skeleton, and breathe. Kiddo, Grant said, laughing and hugging her tight. Sounds like you had fun. Sophie noticed Callan and her expression turned curious. You're the lady from the news. The one Dad's helping. Callan smiled warmly. That's right. Your dad's been incredibly kind to me. He's good at helping people, Sophie said matter-of-factly. It's kind of his thing. She wandered over to the whiteboards, studying the complex web of names and connections. This looks like a mystery. It is, Grant said. A complicated one. Sophie tilted her head, examining the board with surprising focus for a 10-year-old. You've got all these people connected, but you're missing the center person. The one who connects all the dots. Grant and Callan exchanged glances. What do you mean? Grant asked. Sophie pointed to the board. In mystery books, there's always someone in the middle who knows everything but pretends they don't. Like the butler or the nice neighbor. You have all these bad guys, but who's the person they all trust? Who's in the middle? The room went silent. Grant stared at the board with fresh eyes, and suddenly the pattern shifted. She's right. We've been tracking the executors, Cameron and Burke, but someone had to coordinate them. Someone both Virith Global and Meridian Security would trust implicitly. Callan's breath caught. The auditor. The one I hired to investigate the discrepancies. Who was it? Ivy asked, already pulling up files. Valerie Kim. She runs an independent forensic accounting firm. I vetted her personally, checked all her credentials and references. Callan's face paled. She was the only person outside my inner circle who knew exactly what I'd discovered and when. Grant was already moving, pulling up records on another laptop. If Kim is compromised, she could have been feeding information to Burke and Cameron from the beginning. She'd know exactly what evidence you had and what you didn't. Within minutes, they had confirmation. Valerie Kim's firm had received a substantial payment from Apex Advisory 2 weeks before Callan hired her. The setup had been perfect. Place a controlled investigator in Callan's path. Let her think she was gathering evidence. Then use that information to stay one step ahead. She played me, Callan said quietly, anger and betrayal mixing in her voice. I trusted her completely. Grant placed a hand on her shoulder. She was a professional deceiver. That's not your failure, it's hers. Sophie, who'd been listening intently, spoke up. So what do you do now? In mysteries, once you know who the bad guy is, you set a trap. Grant looked at his daughter with pride. Out of the mouths of babes, he turned to Ivy. Can we feed false information to Kim? Make her think we're pursuing the wrong lead? Ivy grinned. Absolutely. If she's still reporting to Burke and Cameron's network, we can use her to control what they think we know. Callan's expression shifted from hurt to determination. Then let's give them a story they'll believe. One that leads them exactly where we want them. One that leads them exactly where we want them. As they huddled around the laptop, crafting a strategic deception, Sophie settled into a corner with a book, occasionally glancing up at the adults with quiet satisfaction. Her simple observation had cracked the case wide open, and though she didn't fully understand the stakes, she knew she'd helped her dad with something important. Grant caught her eye and smiled. In that moment, despite the danger and complexity surrounding them, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the simple joy of purpose shared with people who mattered. Callan wasn't just a client or a case anymore. She was becoming family in the way that counted most, chosen, trusted, worth fighting for. The trap was set with precision. Through carefully planted conversations and deliberately careless email exchanges, they fed Valerie Kim false information suggesting their investigation had stalled. They claimed the evidence against Hayden Burke was circumstantial, that Maxwell's team was focusing on lower-level conspirators, and most importantly, that Callan was considering a settlement to avoid further public scrutiny. It was bait designed to make the conspirators overconfident and sloppy. For 48 hours, nothing happened. Then everything happened at once. Grant was closing the bookstore when his phone rang. An unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, but the message was crystal clear. You think you're clever, Mr. Porter. You think your little trap will work. But you've forgotten something important. We know where Sophie goes to school. We know her routine. We know she has ballet class every Tuesday at 4. And we know you can't protect her every minute of every day. The line went dead. Grant's hand tightened around the phone until his knuckles went white. This wasn't a bluff or a negotiation. This was a direct threat against his daughter, delivered with chilling specificity. He immediately called Linda Walker. Where's Sophie right now? Safe with me at the secure location. Why? What happened? Grant explained the call. Linda's voice turned professional, urgent. We're moving her immediately. Different location, higher security. I'll have 2 additional agents assigned within the hour. Thank you, Grant said, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic helped no one. Keep me updated on every move. He called Maxwell next, who listened grimly. They're desperate. The net's closing, and they know it. This is their last play, scare you into backing down. It won't work, Grant said flatly. But we need to move faster. Before they do something we can't undo. Agreed. I'm accelerating the warrant for Kim's office. We'll execute it tomorrow morning, seize all her files and electronic records. If there's evidence of her coordination with Burke and Cameron, we'll have it. Grant hung up and found Callan waiting in the doorway, having overheard everything. Her expression was stricken with guilt. This is my fault. I brought this danger into your life, put Sophie at risk. Stop, Grant said firmly. They made their choices. You didn't force them to steal, to threaten, to kill. They did that themselves. And now they're going to face the consequences. But Sophie is safer than they think, Grant interrupted. And smarter than they realize. She knows what to do if something feels wrong. We've practiced. Callan wanted to argue but saw the steel in his eyes, the absolute certainty of a father who'd planned for every contingency. What do we do now? Grant walked to the window, watching the street with heightened awareness. We finish this. Tomorrow, when Maxwell executes that warrant, we'll have the final piece. Kim's records will connect every thread, prove the coordination, expose everyone involved. And once that's public, Sophie becomes irrelevant to them. There's no point threatening her when the evidence is already in federal hands. And if they move tonight? Before the warrant? Then we're ready. Grant gestured to the corner where he'd assembled an emergency kit, copies of all evidence on multiple encrypted drives, contact information for media outlets, and a detailed written statement signed by both him and Callan outlining everything they'd discovered. If anything happens to either of us, Grant said quietly, this information goes public immediately. Maxwell has instructions, and so do 3 journalists I trust. The dead man's switch is already in place. Callan stared at the kit, the physical manifestation of how dangerous their situation had become. I never imagined it would go this far. When I walked into your bookstore that night, I just wanted to hide for a few hours. And now? Grant asked. Now I want to make sure they never do this to anyone else. Her voice hardened with resolve. Brody's dead because he knew too much. How many others have they silenced over the years? How many people lost everything because they stood in the way of profit? Grant nodded slowly. Then we don't just expose them. We dismantle the entire system that protected them. They worked through the night, refining their evidence, preparing for every possible scenario. At 3 a.m, exhausted but wired with adrenaline, they sat together in the quiet bookstore. 2 people who'd become unlikely partners in a fight neither had chosen, but both refused to abandon. Thank you, Callan said softly. Not just for helping me, but for showing me what integrity looks like when it costs something real. Grant met her eyes. You did the same for me. I'd forgotten what it felt like to fight for something bigger than survival. You reminded me why I left forensics in the first place, because some things are worth the risk. As dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, they prepared for what would either be their vindication or their end. The warrant would be executed in 4 hours. One way or another, by sunset, the truth would be known and somewhere across the city. In elegant offices and comfortable homes, powerful people were making their own preparations, unaware that the trap they thought they'd avoided was actually closing around them with mathematical precision. The federal warrant was executed at 6 a.m, precisely when Valerie Kim's office would be empty, but her digital system still active. Maxwell led the team personally, accompanied by FBI forensic specialists and 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Division. Grant and Callan watched from Maxwell's office via secure video feed as agents methodically collected computers, file cabinets, and backup drives. The operation took less than 40 minutes, efficient and thorough. By 8, the preliminary analysis was complete. What they found exceeded even Grant's expectations. Maxwell entered the conference room where they'd been waiting, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression Grant had seen before. The grim satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd just been handed an airtight case. We've got them, Maxwell said simply, spreading documents across the table. Kim kept meticulous records. Every conversation with Burke, every payment from Apex Advisory, every piece of information she fed back to the conspirators. She documented everything, probably as insurance if they ever tried to betray her. Callan leaned forward, scanning the pages with growing disbelief. She recorded phone calls. There are transcripts here of Burke explicitly ordering her to mislead my investigation. Better than that, Maxwell said, pulling out another document. We have emails between Kim and Cameron Steele discussing Nash's removal 2 days before he died. They don't explicitly say murder, but the implication is clear enough for a jury. Grant studied a financial ledger Kim had maintained. She tracked every dollar. This shows the complete money flow from Virith contracts through shell companies to personal accounts. It's a roadmap of the entire conspiracy. Maxwell nodded. We're executing additional warrants within the hour. Burke, the remaining board members, and 6 executives at Meridian Security. By noon, they'll all be in custody. Callan sat back, the weight of months of fear and fighting finally lifting from her shoulders. It's really over? The immediate threat is over, Maxwell corrected. The legal process will take time. Trials, testimonies, appeals. But yes, the conspiracy is exposed. They can't threaten or silence anyone anymore. Grant's phone buzzed. A text from Linda Walker. Sophie secure. Threats neutralized. She's asking when she can come home. He showed the message to Callan, who smiled with genuine relief. You can bring her home. Not yet, Grant said cautiously. Not until Burke and the others are actually in custody. Maxwell, what's the timeline? Arrest teams are moving now. I'll have confirmation within 2 hours. Those 2 hours felt like days. Grant paced the conference room while Callan worked with Maxwell's staff, preparing her official statement for the press conference scheduled for that afternoon. Every few minutes, Maxwell's phone would buzz with updates. Burke located and arrested at his home. 3 board members taken into custody at their offices. Meridian security executives detained. At 10:30, Maxwell's phone rang with the call they'd been waiting for. He listened intently, then hung up with a satisfied nod. That's all of them. Every primary conspirator is in federal custody. It's done. Grant immediately called Linda Walker. Bring Sophie home. Within minutes, news alerts began flooding phones and computers across the country. Massive corruption. Scandal rocks tech industry, federal raids. Target Virith global executives. Billionaire CEO vindicated, evidence reveals. Elaborate frame-up. Federal prosecutor announces charges in multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme. Callan watched the headlines scroll past with surreal detachment. Just days ago, she'd been the villain in these stories. Now the truth was reshaping the narrative in real time. There's going to be a press conference at 2, Maxwell said. Callan, you'll need to be there. The public needs to see you, hear your side directly. Are you ready? She looked at Grant, who nodded encouragingly. I'm ready. The press conference was held at the federal courthouse, a symbolic choice that emphasized the legal victory. Callan stood at a podium flanked by Maxwell and 2 FBI officials facing dozens of cameras and reporters. Grant watched from the side, deliberately staying out of frame. His role in the investigation still largely unknown to the public, Callan spoke with clarity and controlled emotion. She outlined the conspiracy, acknowledged the brave whistleblowers who'd helped expose it, and thanked law enforcement for their diligence. She didn't mention Grant by name, protecting his privacy as they'd agreed, but when a reporter asked how she'd survived when everything seemed lost, Callan's answer was simple and true. I found help in an unexpected place. From someone who believed in justice more than convenience. That's all any of us can do. Find the courage to stand up and the wisdom to accept help when it's offered. As the press conference concluded and reporters scattered to file their stories, Grant slipped out a side entrance. He had somewhere more important to be. Sophie was waiting at the bookstore when he arrived, Linda Walker standing guard until Grant took over. The moment Sophie saw him, she ran into his arms with the uncomplicated joy only a 10-year-old could express. Dad! Linda said, we won. The bad guys got caught. Grant held her tight, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Yeah, kiddo. We won. Because you're a hero, Sophie said matter-of-factly. No, Grant corrected gently. Because a lot of people did the right thing when it mattered. That's not heroism. That's just being human. 6 months later, Turner and Page books looked much the same from the outside. The same worn sign, the same weathered door, the same gentle glow of light through the windows. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The store had become more than a bookstore. It was now a gathering place, a community hub where people came not just for books, but for connection. Grant had added a small cafe area with mismatched chairs and tables where locals met for coffee and conversation. On Tuesday evenings, Sophie led a mystery book club for kids her age. Thursday nights were reserved for a discussion group focused on ethics, justice, and civic responsibility. And on Saturday mornings, Callan taught workshops on financial literacy and entrepreneurship. For young women looking to start their own businesses, the legal proceedings had concluded with convictions across the board. Hayden Burke received 15 years for conspiracy and fraud. Cameron Steele got 12. Valerie Kim, in exchange for her cooperation and extensive documentation, received a reduced sentence of 5 years. The remaining board members faced various sentences, their careers and reputations destroyed. Virith Global had been restructured under new leadership, with Callan returning as CEO, but with a fundamentally different corporate philosophy. She'd implemented radical transparency measures, independent oversight boards, and whistleblower protections that became industry standards, but her heart wasn't in running a corporation anymore. She'd discovered something more meaningful during those desperate days in Grant's bookstore: the simple power of helping people directly, without layers of bureaucracy or corporate strategy. So she'd made a decision that shocked the business world. She sold her controlling stake in Virith Global and used the proceeds to establish the Porter Foundation, named after the man who'd saved her life and taught her what integrity looked like in practice. The foundation focused on 3 areas: supporting small businesses in underserved communities, providing legal defense for whistleblowers, and funding forensic investigations into corporate fraud. Grant served as an advisor but refused any formal title or salary. On this particular Saturday morning, as autumn leaves drifted past the bookstore windows, Grant stood behind the counter watching Callan teach a class of 15 young women about reading financial statements and identifying red flags. Sophie sat in the front row, taking notes with the seriousness of someone twice her age. Maxwell stopped by, as he often did, for coffee and conversation. "You two have built something special here," he said, nodding toward the classroom. Grant smiled. "We just created space for people to learn and grow. They're doing the actual building." "Still modest after everything," Maxwell chuckled. "Your testimony was crucial in securing those convictions. You know that, right?" "I know a lot of people contributed," Grant replied. "That's how justice actually works. Not through heroes, but through ordinary people choosing to do the right thing." When Callan's class ended, the students lingered, asking questions, sharing their own business ideas, building connections that would last long after they left. Sophie helped serve cookies Grant had baked that morning, her social skills growing stronger with each gathering. As the crowd thinned, Callan joined Grant at the counter, accepting the cup of tea he'd prepared. "Thank you," she said, as she did every Saturday. "For what?" Grant asked, as he always did. "For reminding me that worth isn't measured in market valuation or quarterly earnings. It's measured in the lives we touch and the integrity we maintain when no one's watching." Grant nodded toward Sophie, who was laughing with 2 girls from her book club. "She's watching. That's enough for me." Callan followed his gaze. "She's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her," Grant corrected. "And lucky that a scared woman walked into my bookstore one rainy night and reminded me why I chose this life in the first place." As evening approached and the bookstore slowly emptied, Grant locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. Callan helped him straighten chairs and wipe down tables, their movements synchronized from months of shared routine. "Do you ever regret it?" Callan asked suddenly. "Leaving forensics, choosing the quiet life, giving up the recognition you deserved?" Grant considered the question. "Every path has costs. I gave up recognition, advancement, the validation that comes from solving high-profile cases. But I gained something more valuable, the ability to be present for Sophie, to build a life based on my values instead of someone else's priorities." and to help people without the constraints of bureaucracy or politics. He gestured around the bookstore. This place isn't impressive by conventional standards. It doesn't generate wealth or prestige, but it's real. The people who come here are seen, heard, valued. That's worth more than any title or salary. Callan nodded, understanding settling in her bones. I'm starting to see that. For years, I chased bigger deals, higher valuations, more influence. And it almost destroyed me. Now I'm helping 15 women understand financial statements. And somehow that feels more meaningful than closing billion-dollar contracts. Because it is, Grant said simply. Scale doesn't equal impact. Sometimes the most important work happens in small rooms with small groups of people who leave changed. As they finished cleaning and prepared to close up, Sophie emerged from the back room with her backpack, ready to head upstairs for dinner. She paused, looking at Grant and Callan with the perceptive eyes of someone who understood more than adults gave her credit for. You two are going to keep doing this, right? She asked. The teaching and helping and all of it? As long as people need it, Grant confirmed. Sophie smiled. Good, because I want to do it too when I'm older. Help people like you do. Grant knelt down to her level. You already are, kiddo. Every time you're kind to someone, every time you stand up for what's right, you're making a difference. As they climbed the stairs to the apartment, leaving the bookstore dark and quiet below, Grant felt the contentment that came from living aligned with his values. The world still held corruption, injustice, and cruelty, but it also held bookstores and community workshops and young girls who wanted to help people. And sometimes, in the spaces between headlines and scandals, quiet revolutions happened. Not through grand gestures or dramatic confrontations, but through steady, daily choices to see people, believe them, and stand beside them when the world said to look away. That was Grant Porter's legacy. Not the cases he'd solved or the criminals he'd helped convict, but the simple, radical act of caring when it cost something real. And in teaching that lesson to his daughter and to a billionaire who'd lost everything before finding what actually mattered, he'd created ripples that would extend far beyond anything he'd ever photograph or document. The light in Turner and Page books might have been off, but its influence burned bright in the lives it touched, steady and true. A beacon for anyone who needed to remember that goodness still existed in the world. Quiet and unassuming, waiting in small bookstores on ordinary streets, tended by ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.